Hi again, Rachel here from Altea Yoga. So I'm going to talk today about breathing, the importance of breathing, right? Most people understand that breathing is the basis of life. You know, when we are born, the first thing that a newborn baby does is take a breath of air. And when we finish this incarnation, when we die, the last thing we do is a nice soft exhale. And everything in between is a series of breaths. Those breaths can be shorter or longer, they can be deeper or shallower, but one thing's for sure, if you're alive, you're breathing. So why is this so important? Well, most people understand that there's an interchange of gases in the lungs, right? So we get rid of the carbon dioxide and we take in oxygen. And without that basic process, our cells cannot live, okay? So we start there. But actually, when we look a little bit farther than just simple mechanics of ventilation, so when we're talking about, like the uptake of oxygen and whatnot, we're going to see that the breath and the movement of the lungs and the movement of the diaphragm actually has a very direct impact on other systems of the body. And the two that we're going to talk about today are the lymphatic system and the cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, so I'm going to start with the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is the drainage system of the human body. It's estimated that about 10% of all the liquid that circulates to the extremities, so via the blood, needs to be picked back up by the lymphatic system. So that means about 90% goes into the venous blood supply and about 10% stays in the tissue spaces and eventually gets swept up into little tiny tubes that we've got there and becomes lymph. So you understand, lymph is not made the way that blood is made because it's made in the bone marrow. Lymph is a byproduct of normal metabolism. Now, the lymph has to return from the extremities, say the tips of the fingers, the tips of the toes, or even the internal organs. It has to somehow return to the central lymphatic circulation. And it does that by little pulsations in some of the lymph vessels, but they're not very important. Muscle pumping, so that's why people who are totally sedentary tend to get swollen ankles. And the other main force of lymphatic movement is the breath, because the diaphragm, which sits here, when it goes down, when we inhale and it comes back up, when we exhale, is kind of like a piston in a car. And if you think about it, what a piston does is it creates a pressure difference. It's moving like this, and that is like an explosion of energy that makes your car wheels turn. So the diaphragm can be considered in the same sort of way, that the diaphragm is a pump in the center of the body that helps to sort of suck the lymph up from the legs and then push it up into the lymphatic ducts, which are here in the center of the body. Now, why is that relevant? Well, the lymphatic system is really your immune system. Lymphocytes are stored in the spleen, but they are differentiated in the thymus. So the spleen and the thymus are lymphatic organs, okay? And lymphocytes are like white blood cells, but they're also lymph cells. And they are your first line of defense against infection. Any kind of infection, lymphocytes are there. Your lymph nodes are filtering and they catch any invaders. They send messages to your thymus, which can then mount an adequate fast response and protect you. So movement of the lymphatic system, totally dependent on breathing, and your immunity totally depends on the lymphatic system. So breathe deeply. Okay, point number 2, cerebrospinal fluid. What is the cerebrospinal fluid? Okay, the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. Now, that's kind of a closed system, okay? Because you've heard of the blood-brain barrier. That means that generally speaking, if there's an infection that's going around in the blood, usually the brain will be protected, okay? But of course, the brain needs nutrients, it needs liquid, it needs all sorts of stuff. And really, it's like the blood of the brain, of course the brain has blood, is the cerebrospinal fluid, which sits in some sinuses, it sits in some holes inside of the head. Your cranium is not 100% full. And it also flows down the spinal column all the way to your sacrum in the meninges. Now, the meninges are membranes. You might have heard of the meninges if you think about the word meningitis, which is swelling of the meninges. So the meninges go from the brain and all the way down, and one of them comes just down to the lumbar region, another one comes a little bit farther, and they transport the cerebrospinal fluid. Now, why is that important? Well, your famous intervertebral discs, as everyone knows, hernias, slip discs, etc., they have very little blood supply, maybe just a little tiny bit on their periphery. So how do they get their nutrients? Cerebrospinal fluid. Okay? Now, the cerebrospinal fluid is profoundly influenced by breathing. Again, the diaphragm. It has this pumping, piston-like sort of energy. It moves things from top to bottom, okay? Now, the diaphragm is a muscle. It's a flat muscle, and it's got holes in it called foramen. And so when you hear, for example, about the famous hiatus hernia, what is the hiatus hernia? Well, the hiatus is a hole in the diaphragm. And there are some tubes that have to pass through that hole. That's why the hole's there, right? So in the hiatus, you've got the esophagus, which is where the food goes down. And then you've also got the aorta, major artery of the human body. And you've also got the lymphatic duct. So that's really important. And the same holds true for another hole where the spinal column has to pass. Although, of course, the spinal column is a little bit more peripheral. But the same holds true. So when you breathe deeply, you move your cerebral spinal fluid. And in fact, there's been some really interesting studies published lately about the importance of deep breathing when we're in the deep state of sleep and the cleaning of the brain. There was a very interesting study published not long ago talking about Alzheimer's patients. Now, what is Alzheimer's? Alzheimer's is a buildup of a certain kind of protein plaque in the brain, which impedes the proper functioning of the nerve cells, i.e. the formation of memory or the recollection of stored memory. Now, these plaques, you can imagine they're like residue. You know, you take a shower and you live in a hard water region and you don't clean your shower, you're going to eventually get a buildup of, calcium on your tiles, which if you wash it once a week, it's pretty easy to get rid of. But if you leave it for 6 months, it's pretty difficult to get rid of. So coming back to the breath, if we have a nice, long, slow, deep breath, we are in effect helping the central nervous system to clean itself, to wash itself. So I've taken almost 8 minutes of your time. I won't take any more right now, but what I want to say is that the importance of deep breathing goes far, far beyond carbon dioxide and oxygen. There are many magical things in your body that you are not even aware of and that are affected by the breath. So stay tuned and subscribe to my channel, because I am going to start to share some of this knowledge that I usually only share when people come and see me in my practice. But everything's online now, and you are online with me. So subscribe, like, share if you think that's good, and catch you later. Namaste. Bye.